All the Young Dudes, Sirius's Perspective by Rollercoaster Words. Chapter 67. 4th Year, February, Part 2. No. The crowd blurred beside him. Sirius realized that he was moving. He'll die. They were at least 5 stories above the ground, which was packed hard and cold by the winter ice. Don't let him die. There were people screaming. Maybe. There was definitely voices. But they came as if from underwater. He can't die. Madame Hooch was pointing her wand, and Reg was slowing, no longer plummeting at breakneck speed. But he was still falling. They'll never let me go. The ground slammed into him with such force that something gave in his ankle, a sharp crack, buckling his knees and pitching him forward into the dirt. He thrust out his arms instinctively, skinning his palms, and then he was up, stumbling forward. His ankle couldn't take the weight, but it didn't matter. He couldn't feel it. And he forced it to travel 3 shaky steps before he collapsed on his knees beside his brother. Regulus was unconscious. He could have been sleeping, except he looked all wrong. Reggie didn't sleep like that, silent and peaceful and motionless. He flailed, he stole blankets, he mumbled nonsense in his dreams. Get up, Sirius thought desperately. Wake up, please. Fear had him by the neck, already kicking tears into his eyes. Someone's hand was on his shoulder. James, it was James. He was saying something. Hospital wing. They had to get him to the hospital wing. Yes, that made sense. Already McGonagall had pushed through the crowd, and James was tugging on his shoulder. Oh, they needed him to let go of Reg. McGonagall had conjured a stretcher. That made sense. That made a lot of sense. Sirius's fingers twisted into his brother's robes. Mate, come on, let's go. James tugged again, gently, and there was a crowd forming around them. Sirius was suddenly very aware of the crush of people. He let go, allowing Madame Hooch to elevate Regulus onto the stretcher, and rubbed roughly at his eyes. You all right? James asked, leaning in close. Can you stand? I'm fine. Sirius shrugged him off, getting to his feet, and nearly fell over again as a searing pain tore through his left leg. It felt as though someone had shoved a hot brand through his bone, the sharpest point of agony radiating from his ankle. He winced. Here, let me... James was there immediately, wrapping his arms around Sirius's waist, and Sirius slung an arm over his shoulder. Together, they hobbled over to Madame Hooch. The crowd of students parted around them, murmuring. At the hospital wing, Madame Pomfrey almost turned them away. Oh no, she huffed, bustling over to one of the beds with her arms full of potion bottles. I do not have time for your antics. He's hurt, James said. Regulus was lying in the bed. His head was bleeding. Sirius realised that James wasn't talking about him. Madame Pomfrey paused, looking down at his leg, as if just realising that Sirius was only standing with the help of his friend. She blinked, then frowned, looking slightly abashed. Right then, she recovered, giving her head a little shake and settling down her potions. You, over here. You, out. But, out, Potter, don't make me tell you again. James opened his mouth, seeming as if he might argue, but a severe look from the nurse changed his mind. He helped Sirius hobble over to the bed that Madame Pomfrey had indicated, giving his shoulder a firm squeeze before leaving. The door swung shut behind him, leaving silence interspersed only by the nurse's swishing robes and the gentle clicking of glass against glass as she picked through her potions. Now then, she said briskly, pouring something onto a cloth and dabbing it against the bloodied part of Reggie's head. How much pain are you in? I'm fine, Sirius said faintly, watching the cloth turn pink, then red. Don't worry about me. She tutted, glancing at his leg. Ankle, is it? Here, drink this. She handed him a small vial, which he accepted wordlessly. If you're not in too much pain, I think I'd better go see your brother first, I'll be with you shortly, dear. Sirius nodded, watching silently as she began to move her wand, murmuring spells. He'd never seen his brother bleed before. He'd never actually seen Reg hurt. He knew that they shared scars, but that only happened when he wasn't there, because if he was there, he protected... What a load of horseshit. The voice was terribly cold and cruel. It slid like ice water into the creases of his mind, permeating. It was his own. You don't protect him. You left him. You're a coward. It wasn't true. It wasn't his fault. He hadn't meant to. He'd tried to keep Regulus from... But did you really try very hard? You left him, even though you knew what would happen. That wasn't true. He hadn't known. He couldn't have. He'd thought there'd be time, that things would be different at Hogwarts, that he'd be able to save him. Yes, No, keep him. But you left him. You left him, and you keep leaving. But it wasn't his fault. He tried, but Regulus kept pushing him away. Reg wanted to be cruel and dark, and something their parents could be proud of. You let them have him, because you knew it was the only way they'd let you go. Madame Pomfrey finished her spells. She was tipping a potion at his brother's lips, lifting his head with one hand to help him swallow. I didn't mean to, Sirius thought helplessly. I didn't mean to. The gilt grinned, jaw hanging open, mouth bloody. Sirius tried to run from it, but there was no hiding in his own mind. He couldn't deny the words he'd thought, the gut instinct, the deepest, most honest reaction when he'd seen his brother falling. They'll never let me go. He sat and watched Regulus stop bleeding. The gilt burrowed into his rib cage, pulping his heart between his teeth and hollowing him out. Sirius was very quiet as Madame Pomfrey saw to his ankle, mending the worst of the break and giving him a healing draught to take before bed. He wouldn't need to stay at the hospital wing overnight. Reg would. Can I stay with him? He asked when she was done. She paused, studying his face. All right, dear. You'd keep his leg elevated, though. Let me pull up a stool. When he was little, Regulus had developed a debilitating fear of Gouhls. He was sure that they were everywhere, lurking in the shadows of every corner, only waiting for him to close his eyes before they snapped him up into their jaws. Walpurga refused to allow him to sleep with the light on, said it would make him soft. He cried, but that only upset her, vindicating her belief that Reggie needed to be toughened up. Sirius had started sneaking into his little brother's bedroom every night. He checked under the bed, in the closet, and stood guard until Regulus fell asleep, assuring him that no ghoul could slip past his vigilant eyes. Do you know what ghouls hate? He whispered one night, after Walpurga had threatened to put locks on their doors if she caught Sirius sneaking out of his room one more time. What? Reg asked, eyes huge and dark in the pale moonlight. Toast. Toast? It was his little brother's favourite food at the time. Yes, Sirius nodded solemnly. It's like poison to them. Regulus wrinkled his nose, sceptical. You're making that up. Am not. Look. Sirius glanced around furtively, and then, carefully, pulled up the leg of his pyjama bottoms. Reg's eyes widened when he saw the scar, just one at the time, a long, thin line at the back of Sirius's calf. A ghoul tried to get me once, Sirius whispered. See this scar? It reached out and grabbed me with its claws. Regulus gasped, horrified, then burrowed further into the blankets. But, Sirius said quickly, I had eaten toast for breakfast. And you know what? What? It smelled it. And you know what happened when it smelled the toast? What? It ran away. You're lying. I'm not. Where do you think I got the scar from, I told you, toast is poison to them. Even if you only eat one piece, they'll smell it on you and run off as fast as they can. Do you mean it? Sirius grinned. I swear. I just have to eat toast. Lots and lots of toast. Do you think you can do that? Reggie nodded fervently. Blankets pulled up all the way to his chin. Sirius smiled. Good. Then you won't even need me to keep watch. You'll be perfectly safe, all right? All right. But can you stay here just for tonight? Sirius wasn't sure why he was thinking about this now. Maybe it was watching Reg sleep, chest rising and falling evenly, the way it had under the heavy blankets all those years ago. How long had it been since they'd last spoken? 4 months? 5? The door to the hospital wing swung open, suddenly, and a whirl of black robes filled the entryway, heeled boots clicking sharply on the tile. His mother. Sirius shrank back as she approached, feeling her fury like static in the air, palpable and needling. She swept towards him, cold rage on her face, but he couldn't bring himself to move. Whatever was coming, he deserved it. It was his fault, after all. Madame Pomfrey stepped in front of the bed, smiling. He's quite all right. Just a heavy knock, she said soothingly. I've given him a healing draught to mend the fractures. Fractures? Walpurga hissed. She stood like a statue at the end of the bed, eyes darting rapidly over Reggie's prone form. Her hair was a bit dishevelled, Sirius noted, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "Very minor and completely healed now," Madame Pomfrey assured her. "He'll be up and about by tomorrow morning. Now, Sirius has— This is our family physician," Walpurga interrupted, extending her hand. Bardrick Heathering, a wizened little man who Sirius recognised from his periodic visits growing up, stepped out from behind her. "He will be taking over my son's care. I'm taking him home as soon as he has been thoroughly examined." "No," Sirius thought wildly, panic gripping at him like a fist. "Don't let her take him." "I'm telling you, everything that can be done has been done," Madame Pomfrey said, sounding a bit put out. Walpurga sneered at her imperiously. "Within your competence, I'm sure. But he is my son, and I will care for him as I see fit." Madame Pomfrey was speechless, red-faced and clearly offended. McGonagall leaned over and whispered something in her ear, which seemed to mollify her. Heathering placed his familiar dragon-skin case on the bedside table and snapped it open, getting to work. His mother turned to glare at him. Sirius felt very, very small. "You," she said, voice flat. "And what are you doing here?" "He's my brother," Sirius said. He meant for it to sound strong, defiant, but his voice was dust in his throat. The words barely audible, even to his own ears. "What?" his mother barked. "Speak up, boy!" "He's my brother," Sirius replied, voice cracking. His heart beat like a frightened rabbit in his chest. Walpurga tutted. "For goodness sake, have you been crying? Try to show at least a modicum of decorum." Sirius stared at the floor, letting his hair fall over his face. He wanted to be anywhere, anywhere, anywhere as long as it wasn't here. His mother continued to speak, voice sharp and dismissive as she said, "You may leave, Sirius. Your father and I will see you in June." She turned back to Regulus, and Sirius disappeared. He was aware, vaguely, of his friends watching, of McGonagall placing a hand on his shoulder, of the strange shaky feeling in his ankle. Madame Pomfrey pushed another potion into his hands on the way out. "Straight up to bed. Drink every drop, you hear me? You shouldn't be in too much pain, but it'll be uncomfortable tonight." Sirius nodded. The adrenaline that had kept him going was slowly bleeding out of his body, leaving him exhausted. James clapped him on the shoulder, squeezing, and Sirius felt himself be guided into the corridor. They walked in silence most of the way to the Gryffindor Tower, which Sirius was grateful for. The only interruption came when they reached the jewel staircase, and Peter said suddenly, "We've missed dinner." James and Remus spun around to shoot him dirty looks, but Sirius was too tired to care. Peter spoke again immediately, sounding quite indignant as he said, "What I meant was that I'll go to the kitchens now and send something up. Is that okay with you two?" "Nice one, Pete," James said apologetically. This was all the agreement Peter needed. He turned and scurried off down the staircase, while the other three boys continued upwards. It was slow going, considering that the majority of their group was struggling with a pronounced limp. "Right state we must look," Sirius muttered, trying to catch his breath as they paused on the landing. "What's wrong with you, anyway?" Remus asked, sounding a bit winded as he rubbed his hip. "Broke my ankle," he replied. "Landed on it too hard." James winced sympathetically, but Sirius just shrugged. "Can't feel it. It's just a bit wobbly." When they finally approached their dorm, Sirius went immediately to the bathroom, where he locked the door and ran the shower. He could feel the weight of his friend's concern, heavy, saturating the air and the room outside. But he needed to be alone. He didn't think he could bear their quiet pity, or their misguided attempts to cheer him up. Sirius stood beneath the water for a long time, letting it wash over him. The bathroom filled with steam, and when he stepped out he had to wipe the condensation from the mirror. He stared at himself, studying his face. Was he a bad person? He knew he had flaws. He could be arrogant and quick to anger, and he didn't always take the time to consider the feelings of those around him. But his own capacity for selfishness had scared him. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment, that split second that he saw his brother's body fall, when all he'd thought about was himself. Had he been kidding himself this whole time, lying to himself, trying to convince himself that he had done everything he could for Reggie, that his brother was better suited to the black lifestyle than he was? Had he been using Reg this whole time? Was he just as bad as their parents? The boy in the mirror stared back at him. He didn't have any answers. Sirius unlocked the bathroom door, stepping back into the room amidst the lingering curls of steam. "You hungry, mate?" Peter asked, holding up a plate of sandwiches nervously. Sirius shook his head and walked towards his bed. "Just gonna go to sleep," he muttered, starting to close the curtains. He was so tired. "Sirius?" Remus called out suddenly, as if the word had fought its way past his teeth. Sirius paused, and their eyes met through the gap in the hanging. Remus stared at him, chewing on his lip. "It wasn't your fault," he said finally. "I was watching. It was an accident. You were both just too focused on the game, that's all." Sirius didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to explain that it wasn't just the bludger, that it was so much more than that. He searched for a smile, then shrugged. "Still did it." He closed the curtains tightly before any more of his friends could try to exonerate him. McGonagall informed Sirius privately that Regulus was fine. Their mother was only keeping him home for the week as a precaution. The stern professor made it quite clear in her tone that she thought it was completely ridiculous, though she didn't say so in as many words. Even though Reg had suffered no permanent damage, the Slytherin captain still received a howler from Walpurga Black the next morning, screaming that he'd put her son in danger. The captain hardly blinked, watching the paper tear itself into shreds. Once it had finished shouting with its strange mixture of bemusement and irritation. He'd already started looking for a new seeker. The Quidditch game had been declared incomplete, and both teams had agreed to a rematch once they found someone to replace Regulus. Sirius dragged himself to classes, even though all he wanted to do was lie in bed. His ankle had healed up fully overnight, so he couldn't even use that as an excuse to rot in bed all day. His head was still a mess, though, so tangled up with thoughts about Reg and their mother and what kind of brother he was, that he could hardly focus on lessons and barely managed to pay attention to his friends as they tried to make conversation. He could tell that the other marauders were worried about him. They kept exchanging pointed looks with each other and shooting nervous glances at him when they thought he wouldn't notice. At first they made various efforts to cheer him up, but when Sirius remained non-responsive, they all drew back in their own ways. Peter kept sneaking off to visit Desdemona, James stopped trying to force their usual jovial banter, and Remus stuck his nose in a book, though he continued to dart concerned looks from behind the cover. It was a full moon that night, so Lupin's bed was conspicuously empty as they all changed into their pyjamas. Once Peter fell asleep, James crept over to Sirius's bed, trying once more to get him to talk about what was wrong, but Sirius couldn't bring himself to explain. James was too good, always searching for the best in others, and Sirius didn't think that he could bear to look him in the eye and explain exactly how horrible of a brother, of a person he was. He didn't know how to express in words that his own selfishness was eating him alive from the inside out. So James returned to his own bed, dejected, and Sirius lay awake, gnawing at himself. The next morning there was a note from Reg. "Sirius, I hope you didn't already break out the good champagne, because it looks like I'm going to live. Mum's just being dramatic. She's got Creature coming in and out of my room with a cold compress and a fresh cup of tea every 5 minutes. She wanted you kicked off the team, but I talked her out of it. You don't need to become any more insufferable than you already are with your stupid anti-Slytherin campaign, which is accomplishing literally nothing, you oaf. I'll be back at Hogwarts in a couple of days. Try not to be too disappointed. Sincerely, Regulus Arcturus Black. P.S. They told me that you broke your ankle trying to rush oh so heroically to my aid. You didn't need to do that. I would have been fine." Sirius shook James off to go to the hospital wing for a checkup, insisting that he'd be fine alone. He wasn't sure how many more concerned looks he could stomach. When he arrived, Remus was there, asleep in one of the beds. After Madame Pomfrey gave him the once-over and declared his bones to be healed, she allowed him to stay. Sirius paused for a moment and just stood at the end of Remus's bed. His friend looked very different when he was sleeping. The little crease between his brows smoothed over, making him look peaceful, gentler. His lips were slightly parted, chest rising and falling with each breath, and the scar across his face was more prominent. Sirius was pretty sure that Remus had started using some cosmetic spells that he'd learnt from the girls to try and fade it. But now, Before he'd had the chance to cast it, Sirius could clearly trace the line of the pale, taut skin with his eyes. Remus began to stir, eyelids fluttering. "Morning, Moony," Sirius said quietly as his friend sat up. Remus rubbed his eyes, blinking the sleep away lethargically. Morning," he slurred, groggy and looking a bit surprised to see Sirius standing there. "What you doing here?" His accent tended to slip when he was tired. Sirius liked it. It felt like Moony was letting his guard down. He perched at the end of his bed, sticking out his foot. "Check up on my ankle. It's fine now." "Oh, good," Remus nodded, struggling to sit up. "How was it?" Sirius asked, gesturing vaguely to his friend's body. "Fine. Normal. James here too." "Nah." Sirius tried to keep his voice casual. "Giving him a break from me." Remus frowned. "I don't think he minds." "Well, I do, though." After a moment, Remus nodded, seeming to understand. Remus always seemed to understand. "Moony?" "Yeah?" Sirius hesitated, wondering if it was a good idea to speak. But he was so bad at bottling things up, and Remus didn't look at him like the way James did, like he was a good person. The way Remus looked at him was something else. "You know how you said it wasn't my fault?" "It wasn't your fault." Remus spoke so firmly that he made himself cough, and Sirius leapt to his feet to grab a glass of water from behind the nightstand. He passed it over, watching as the other boy gulped greedily, spilling some of the contents from the glass. Water trickled down the corner of his mouth, down to his jaw. He wiped it with the back of his hand. Sirius looked away, out of the window over Remus's head. "I didn't hit him on purpose, you're right," he said, searching for the right words, heart kicking with nerves in his chest. "But when I saw him fall, like that, I thought, don't let him die." "Well, of course," Remus said, reasonably. "He's your brother. Of course you didn't want him to." "I wasn't thinking about him, though," Sirius interrupted, needing to explain. "I was thinking about me. I was thinking, if he dies, then I'll be the only one left, and my parents will. I wouldn't have any way out. I need Regulus to stay alive. I need him to be the perfect son, so it doesn't matter if I'm the bad son. That's what I was thinking. I'm a coward." It was out now, the ugliest part of him, guts spread neatly out on the bed between them. He waited, needing Remus to say something, wanting something. He wasn't sure what. After a few moments, Remus spoke. "You'd still be sorry if he died, though. Not just because of that." "Yeah, but my first thought—" "People don't think properly when they're scared," Remus interrupted. "Believe me, I saw you. You risked your life to save him. That's not cowardly. Broke your stupid ankle like the idiotic, hard-headed Gryffindor that you are." Sirius's throat felt tight. He forced himself to breathe, releasing a strained laugh. He looked down at his feet, then back at Remus. He didn't know what to say. Remus smiled. "Reg's gonna be all right." "Yeah." Sirius wished that he could stop his heart from pounding. "Fine. He howled me this morning. Being waited on hand and foot, sounds like. Mother tried to get me kicked off the team too, but he stopped her." "Well, there you go then," Remus smirked. "You're still the bad son." Sirius laughed without meaning to, and felt a bit better. Chapter 68. 4th year, March. Saturday, the 8th of March, 1975. Sirius was going to die. He really, truly was in grave danger of perishing. If time didn't start to move faster, he was pretty sure that he was going to explode in the middle of the common room. Some people were simply built for keeping secrets, and Sirius Black was not one of them. Remus's birthday was in 2 days, a Monday, which meant if they wanted to celebrate, really celebrate, it would have to happen this weekend. Luckily, the Marauders already had a plan in place. Unluckily, that plan stipulated utmost secrecy to ensure maximum surprise on behalf of one Mr. Lupin. By the time night fell, Sirius was practically clawing at the walls. James had told him about 6 different times to calm down. The second the clock struck 9, Sirius was bouncing upstairs to their room. Mooney had retired earlier to lounge about and listen to one of Sirius's records. He kept stealing the record player and squirreling it away by his bed, but Sirius couldn't bring himself to mind. He burst through the door, startling the poor boy as he practically leapt across the room. "Ready?" Sirius asked, grinning wickedly and bouncing from foot to foot. "For what?" Remus pulled his nose out of his book, marking his place before setting it aside. "For your birthday surprise, obviously," Sirius drawled. "Come on, up you get. Shoes on, please. Wear those mad muggle boots you've got, the ones with the crazy laces." Where are we going?" "Out." He dug around in his trunk for a pair of muggle jeans and a black t-shirt. Remus was already wearing jeans, as he often did on the weekends. "Oh, you mean out?" his friend asked, raising an eyebrow as Sirius threw off his robes to change. Remus wore the boots with the crazy laces, as instructed. Sirius tapped his foot impatiently as he laced them up, watching the scarred fingers deftly tie the knots. Luckily, he didn't ask any more questions. Sirius was already on the verge of breaking down and spilling his guts, which James would definitely hold against him. They walked downstairs, looking, Sirius was sure, like the height of Muggle fashion in the outfits he had carefully selected. James and Peter met them in the common room, and the three of them exchanged mischievous grins. "You know my birthday isn't for 2 days yet," Remus said, smiling dryly and raising an eyebrow. "Tonight's events are time-sensitive," Sirius replied, all business. He was struggling to remain cryptic and mysterious. He was just so excited. "And you don't have to worry," James smirked, opening the portrait door to guide them out of the common room. "We won't forget to sing for you on Monday at breakfast." "And lunch," Peter added. "And dinner," Sirius finished, still bouncing around with anticipation as they wound down the Gryffindor staircase. "Under you go, lads," James instructed, drawing out the invisibility cloak and casting it over the four of them like a net. They had to squeeze very close together, and Remus had to hunch considerably, but they still managed to barely fit. If Remus continued to grow at his current pace, though, they wouldn't all fit under for much longer. Fortunately, they didn't have far to go. They shuffled to the statue of the humpbacked witch and snuck behind it, stepping one by one into the tunnel that led to Honeydukes. "So, 15, Sirius said, clapping Remus on the shoulder, once they were freed from behind the confines of the cloak. "Excited?" Remus shrugged. "Never really thought about it. You tell me. You're the oldest." "Well, obviously, I'm much wiser and more mature than the rest of you," James snorted, walking in the lead with his wand lit. Sirius chose graciously to ignore it, continuing, "I'd rather be 17, though. Then we could apparate at least." "Oh, don't start," Peter groaned, a few steps behind them. "He actually wanted to try and apparate, Remus, just for your birthday, so we could get out to Hogsmeade easier." "Can't apparate inside Hogwarts," Remus pointed out. 10 points to Mooney," Sirius grinned. "We could have apparated out of the cellar, though. Save us having to try and get past old Honeyduke." "Apparation's really hard, though, isn't it?" Remus asked, looking sceptical. Sirius rolled his eyes, utterly confident as he responded, "Yeah, but we could do it." "It was a bit much on top of everything else we've got to do this term, though," Peter grumbled. Sirius turned to glare at him, irritated. Peter was always blurting out things that, honestly, he shouldn't. The boy had no sense of subtlety. It was a wonder that he managed to keep any secrets at all. Fortunately, Remus didn't seem to catch on. "You mean with the exams coming up?" he asked, looking at Peter. The shorter boy nodded, relieved. "Yeah, exactly," he huffed. "Exams. I'm definitely going to fail History of Magic this year. Definitely. I'll never get an owl in it." This turned them handily onto the subject of owls, an excellent opportunity to moan about schoolwork and which subjects they were least prepared for, although Sirius expected that Peter was the only one who really needed to worry about his grades. Eventually, they reached the Honeyduke's cellar, only to discover a horrid turn of events. "Bugger," James said, shaking the locked door. "He's usually still up doing his accounts or whatever. Must have gone to bed early." "Or he could be out," Remus suggested. "It's a Saturday night, innit?" "What are we going to do?" Peter asked, fretting. "Alohomora? "Oh, but we can't do magic." "Well, let me see," Remus said. He stepped forward authoritatively and reached for something in his back pocket, withdrawing a hairpin. The other marauders watched as he inspected the lock for a moment, then smiled. "Easy." Sirius stared, entranced, as Remus bent the pin and carefully stuck it into the keyhole, stroking gently and leaning in close to the door. The others held their breath, waiting, and heard a sudden, distinct click. Remus grinned, stepping back and opening the door with a flourish. Ta-da! Sirius blinked, dumbfounded. When had Moony learnt to do that? It wasn't fair for one person to be so bloody cool without even trying. "You beauty!" James exclaimed. "Come on, let's go." Once inside the shop, they didn't need to worry. The lock worked from the inside. Then, finally, they were outside on Hogsmeade High Street, in the chilly night air. Sirius was giddy with adrenaline, buzzing from the rush of sneaking out. He had to refrain from skipping as they made their way up the cobbled street, past the 3 broomsticks, the closed shops and the post office. He halted abruptly in front of another pub, the Hog's Head. It was rougher than the 3 broomsticks, shabbier, and the Hogwarts students usually steered clear of it. Tonight, however, there was an A-frame chalkboard on the pavement outside, which contained their entire reason for their unsupervised nighttime stroll. Live music tonight, open mic, Muggle tribute acts. Oh my god, Remus's eyes went wide, reading the sign. A look of absolute delight crossed his face, broad grin lighting up his features. "What do you think?" Sirius demanded. Sirius promised us you'd love it, James said nervously. Remus didn't answer, just stared at the chalkboard, then at Sirius. "I love it," he said fervently. The words sent a smug thrill through Sirius. Of course Moony loved it. He'd known that he would. It was perfect inside, not too crowded nor too quiet, and they had arrived just in time for the first act. It wasn't quite as comfortable as the 3 broomsticks, with straw on the floor and rickety wooden chairs at the tables. But they at least wouldn't have to worry about getting caught by someone they knew. "I'll get the first round in," Sirius offered quickly, smiling impishly as he turned towards the bar. "Sirius," James frowned. "Butterbeers, yeah?" "Mm-hmm." He hurried off, leaving his friends to find a table. The bar was being tended by a gruff-looking man with a wiry beard. Stained shirt sleeves rolled up over his forearms as he wiped down the counter. He eyed Sirius skeptically as the boy walked up. Sirius straightened, trying to look taller, puffing out his chest. "4 butterbeers," he said, pitching his voice a bit deeper. "And—" he hesitated, trying to scan the array of bottles shelved behind the bar. Why was there no menu? There was a menu at the 3 broomsticks. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "Fire whiskies, please. And 4 rounds of mead." The older man studied him for a minute, frowning, but once Sirius dropped a handful of heavy coins on the counter, he just sighed and began grabbing glasses. Sirius had to walk slowly, balancing the heavy tray on his arm as he made his way back to the table where his friends had settled down. The band was just announcing itself as the Banshee Blues when he arrived. "Sirius!" James gasped, catching sight of the crowded tray. "What?" Sirius asked, winking. "I got you your butterbeer." "I meant just butterbeer, for all of us. How did you even get served? Is that fire whiskey?" "And mead." Sirius sat down across from Remus. "Don't drink any if you don't want it. Here." He lifted one of the glasses of fire whiskey, boldly, and raised it. "To our beloved Moony, inventor of the Marauder's Map, architect of our greatest pranks, completer of our overdue homework." "To Moony!" The other 2 cheered, smirking. Remus ducked his head, embarrassed, and looked over at the bar. He was smiling. The only live music Sirius had ever seen performed was by a stuffy wizard orchestra that his parents had dragged him to. They insisted that they were exposing him to higher culture, but Sirius mostly just thought it was boring. This was completely different. The performers took to the stage, dressed in a wild array of Muggle clothing. The lead singer wore a white cowboy hat and a pink feather boa, which Sirius thought was devastatingly cool. He stood with an electric guitar slung low across his hip, cradling the neck with long, thin fingers. Sirius watched the man swagger up and down the small stage as the band played a few Beatles songs, then moved on to some Rolling Stones. His face felt hot, probably because of the fire whiskey. It was awful stuff, somehow burning and stinging at the same time, making Sirius feel as though he were drinking, well, fire. But Remus knocked his first glass back without even flinching, swallowing it as easy as water. Sirius stared, amazed, as he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and grinned. He couldn't let himself look like a wuss in front of Lupin, so Sirius matched him, drink for drink, repressing the urge to shudder and hoping he looked just as impressive, slamming his glass down. After just the first 2 drinks, he started to feel fuzzy and happy, as though the alcohol were numbing all the unpleasant sensations and bringing everything good into sharper focus. The music was more vibrant, his friends' laughter was louder, even the fire whiskey didn't taste bad, which just made it much easier to keep drinking. By the time Banshee Blues were packing up their instruments, Sirius was pretty sure that all the marauders were starting to feel it. He'd been sneaking measures of fire whiskey into James's butterbeer so that the boy next to him was pink-cheeked and smiling. Peter had downed 2 flags of mead and kept asking if he was drunk yet, swaying on his stool all the while. And even Remus seemed more relaxed than usual, an arm slung over the back of the chair and a slightly glazed look in his eye. "That you, Lupin?" a young wizard asked, approaching them from the bar, as a witch with flouncy blonde hair took up the mic. Hi," Remus said, squinting up at the boy. "Arnold Doyle! I was at Hogwarts last year, remember?" Arnold grinned, looking at Remus expectantly. "Your fags got me through my newts." "Oh, right, yeah. Hi, Arnold. Sorry," Remus said quickly, glancing at the wizard with a warm smile. "What are you doing here?" "Girlfriend's playing," he nodded to the stage, where the blonde witch was tuning her acoustic guitar. "What about you? I thought you were still at school." "It's my birthday," Remus grinned, slurring only slightly. "Snuck out, innit?" Arnold laughed. "Gotcha. Well, I won't dob you in. Can I buy you a drink? Say thanks for my cigs." "You're my kind of man, Arnold," Sirius called jovially, the words slurring together on his tongue. Huh. How did Lupin keep so collected? They'd had the same amount to drink. Sirius decided that it must just be because he's taller. Remus was very, very tall, especially right now, in the hogshead, and it wasn't very fair of him. Arnold had left at some point, gone back over to the bar. His girlfriend started playing something soft and folksy, singing in a high, warbling voice. Sirius liked the other band better. Where had the man with the feather boa got to? He had just swung around to scan the bar when he noticed Arnold returning. He set down an entire bottle of fire whiskey on the table. Brilliant. "Happy birthday! Come of age, have you?" "Actually," Peter piped up, giggling. Luckily, Sirius was there to kick him under the table, shutting him up. "Yeah," Remus lied without batting an eye. "Cheers." They made good progress on the bottle of fire whiskey, and about halfway through, Remus pulled out his cigarettes, mumbling that he wanted to smoke. Sirius fervently agreed, watching hungrily as Remus lit one of the little cylinder papers. "Here, come here," Remus slurred, reaching over. He grabbed Sirius's wrist, long fingers circling all the way around as he dragged it halfway across the table. It felt strange, through the haze of alcohol. The pads of Mooney's fingers were warm and rough, and hot against his skin. Remus picked up Sirius's hand, fumbling for a moment, before shoving the cigarette between his fingers, careful not to let the burning end touch. "There," he nodded firmly, satisfied with his accomplishment, and went to light the cigarette for himself. Sirius released a breath. "Those stink, Mooney," James grimaced, leaning away. "And what does he mean your fags got him through his newts?" "Must have me confused with someone else," he said casually, and Sirius couldn't help himself. He burst into hysterical giggles. The next band was even better than the first. Sirius didn't catch their name, as he was distracted trying to toss an ice cube into James's open mouth. But they played a lot of Slade, Status Quo and Black Sabbath. Even Remus, who seemed infuriatingly composed no matter how many drinks he had, got into it, singing along towards the end with everybody else in the pub. Sirius watched in delight as the quiet boy grew more and more rambunctious, until he was climbing up on the chair and waving his glass around like a conductor's baton. Along with the pub around them, the marauders roared. Sirius made a heroic effort to climb up onto his chair too, but fate had other plans. Luckily, James caught him, and he settled for slinging an arm each around Potter and Pettigrew, swinging them back and forth as he belted out. Sirius refused to stop singing his hook, even after the band had packed up, and by the time the marauders were all stumbling and staggering back through Hogsmeade High Street, he'd got the rest of them to join in too. They tripped and laughed all the way back up to Honeydukes. Sirius felt very warm and very bright. The moment they set foot back in the familiar sweet shop, Sirius realised that he was incredibly hungry, on the brink of starvation even. Remus and James carefully dragged him away from the displays of candy, admonishing him in whispers to stay quiet. Sirius didn't know what they were on about. He was practically floating on the floorboards, not making a single sound. Once they were safely in the tunnel, he wiggled out of Remus's restraining grasp, exuberant and happy and full of energy. He continued to sing breathlessly to himself, bouncing from wall to wall as he twirled down the dark passageway. This method of transportation proved to be a grave mistake, for although Sirius reached the end of the tunnel before any of his friends, it came at a cost. All the happy, bubbly warmth diffused throughout his body had coincided somewhere in the vicinity of his stomach, or it had turned into a writhing mass of worms that was now desperately trying to squirm its way up his throat. Sirius froze, trying to force the nausea back down. He would not get sick in front of his friends. "Merlin, how are we going to get him back to bed without waking up the whole castle?" James huffed, finally catching up. He had Peter propped up against one shoulder, looking as if he was about to pass out. Remus walking beside them, glancing over at Sirius, who bent double and promptly threw up. Christ. Remus grabbed his shoulders, stopping him from swaying. Those rough fingertips brushed his jaw, pulling his hair back, and the other hand patted him on the back. Sirius might have curled up and died of embarrassment, but he was too sick to be bothered in that present moment. Remus's voice was very close to his ear. "Why don't you just take Pete back at the cloak? It'll be easier. I'll wait here with him, and then summon the cloak in half an hour or so. Easier with two, anyway." Remus always knew what to do. He was so clever. "Good plan," James agreed. "You sure you don't want me to watch him?" Sirius had the sudden and brilliant idea to curl up into a ball, which he acted on immediately, sinking to the ground and groaning as he cradled his head in his hands. His hair slipped out of Remus's fingers, curtaining his face. "Nah, I've looked after pissheads before," Remus said from very far above. "You go. Cheers for the birthday, James. It's bloody brilliant." "Oh no," Sirius thought, horrified. "I'm ruining Mooney's birthday." He felt very sorry for himself. There were shuffling sounds that indicated James and Peter's exit from the tunnel, then the rough slide of the passageway door closing. Remus sighed as he sat down next to Sirius, so close that their shoulders were almost touching. Well, Sirius's shoulder was almost touching Remus's bicep. Scurrify. Sirius blinked, and the mess in front of him was gone. How was Remus so good at magic? Sirius wasn't even sure if he could hold his wand properly in his current state. He groaned, resting his head against Remus's shoulder, which was very convenient height. It was bony and not very comfortable, but Remus was warm, and Sirius could hear the vibrations of his quiet chuckle as he asked softly, "You right there, mate?" Yeah, sounds about right. Hey, don't puke on me, right?" "Mm-hmm. Thirsty?" Remus, the bloody bastard, quickly chugged the remainder of the fire whiskey. Where he got his stamina from, Sirius had no idea, and touched his wand to the opening. "Aguamente." It filled immediately with crystal clear water, which was just about the most beautiful thing that Sirius had ever seen. He let his eyes fall shut again as Remus passed the bottle over, warning, "Don't drink it too fast or you will puke." Sirius sipped, as instructed, already mortified enough from puking once. Remus must think he was such a girl. He wished he didn't always muck everything up. You're so good at stuff, Moony, he slurred, nudging his head a bit further into Remus's shoulder, trying to get comfortable. Yeah? Remus asked wryly. Picking locks and holding my drink. Exactly, Sirius thought. And school, and talking to girls, and thinking of pranks, and throwing a punch. And magic, he mumbled, half asleep, feeling as though he might exist in that strange, murky in-between world that straddled consciousness and dreams. He wasn't dreaming, was he? Yeah, or wizard, you idiot. No, not dreaming. Remus would probably be much nicer in his dream. Sirius sighed. I'm good at magic, he explained to Moony's shoulder. But you, are magic, you know? You're drunk and talking bollocks, Remus laughed. Oi, don't fall asleep on me, I've got to get you back. Shut up, Sirius breathed, and then he was out.